Well, welcome back, everyone. Please take your seats. Please take your seats. All right, well, now it is my distinct honor to introduce to you Representative Mario Diaz-Balart, who serves the Florida 26th Congressional District. Congressman Diaz-Balart is a senior member of the House Committee on Appropriations and the chairman of the State, Foreign Operations, and Related Programs Subcommittee, in addition to serving on the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development and Defense Subcommittees. It is truly an honor to have him here. Congressman Diaz-Balart, thank you so much.
Thank you. How y'all doing? It's another, I hate to tell you this because you guys are on here. It is just beautiful outside, right? And these are the days that one remembers if you ever need reminding why we are here in South Florida. It's so good to see a lot of old friends. I know that you already spoke today, right? One of the people that I most admire, and I've had the privilege of working with you. And thank you for continuing to be in this fight. Thank you for being in this fight. I saw former President Rosenberg in the audience. My dear friend, good to see you, sir. I do want to introduce two people that are here with me. One, some of you have met, and that's my Deputy Chief of Staff, Miguel Otero. He's been with me for 21 years. So those of you, the FIU family knows him well. Person that you may not, that I'm sure you have not met, is my defense fellow, Major Jason Craycraft, who has been with us now in the office, and he's been a superstar and an amazing addition. Where are you, Major? Thank you. Thank you for your service. And thank you all for putting this hemispheric security conference together. Obviously, so many people that you're speaking to. I want to be brief, but it's interesting. I looked at what the issue is, right? Which are the risks, the dangers, the issues that we are facing in this hemisphere. There are so many of them. There are so many of them. But I'll tell you what the main ones are. And yes, it's obviously things that you are so familiar with, which are drug trafficking, transnational criminal cartels and organizations, terrorist groups that are in this hemisphere, obviously the violation, just horrible human rights abuses and violations that are right here in this hemisphere. Violations of the rule of law. All, by the way, aided and abetted by 3 horrific dictatorships in this hemisphere. All of that I just mentioned, and much more, the influence of Iran, of Russia, of China, all of it aided by those 3 very dangerous dictatorships in this hemisphere. And unfortunately, we have not had a very consistent U.S. policy. At times, we've had, I think, a very positive policy of confronting those dictatorships, of confronting those evils, of not only speaking out, but also pressuring them diplomatically, economically, not only directly, but also pressuring those allies of ours that do business, that pretend that they're dealing business with Costa Rica, when in fact what they're doing is aiding, frankly, what is the biggest national security threat in this region for the United States. We've seen time and time again how the United States, again, at times, I think they've done some positive things. At times, they've shown solidarity with the people in those dictatorships. And at other times, the United States has gone out of its way to appease and to please those dictatorships. In the history of humanity, I don't know when it's been a good thing to unilaterally appease dictatorships, to unilaterally help those who are not only hurting their people, but are also a threat to the national security of the United States. It's never been a positive thing. In the history of humanity, I don't want to be too exaggerated. In the history of humanity, one has helping to appease and fund and give legitimacy to an anti-American thug helped our national security interest in the long run. Now, there are times when the United States has, in essence, jumped in bed with some of the world's most vile figures, because at that moment, it was in the national security interest of the United States. You know, Stalin, right? During World War II. Was that the right thing to do? Yeah, it was. In that moment, during those circumstances. But the reality is that helping anti-American dictatorships who are working day in, day out to hurt your interest has never been a good thing. And we see it happen time and time again, in particular in this hemisphere. You've seen what has happened recently, for example, in Venezuela, right? Where the United States unilaterally, asking nothing in return from the very beginning of, for example, this president's administration, started unilaterally giving concessions, asking nothing in return. That's really been a good idea, hasn't it? It's really worked out. Now you're seeing, by the way, in this hemisphere, other countries, our allies, kind of following suit. You see the UK and others now are looking at ways to, maybe appease, maybe get rid of some sanctions on the Venezuelan dictatorship. You know why? Because heck, the United States is doing it. Why shouldn't they? And it is always profitable to deal with slave labor. It is always profitable to appease those that enslave their people, where there are no labor rights, human rights, etc. And so again, in this hemisphere, what we have seen time and time again is inconsistent policy, from sometimes supporting the cause of freedom, supporting those who are fighting for freedom in those countries, and at other times, frankly, appeasing the tyrants, hoping that that will help the people that they are enslaving. But it's, again, not just an issue for the people in this region. It's not just for those people that I'm concerned about. It is first and foremost a threat to our national security interests. And we can look at example after example as those three dictatorships have, and their influence, and sometimes the appeasement into the acceptance of those dictatorships has led to some other really dangerous things. I could spend a month talking about the crisis at the southern border. I don't have to. I think you all know about that. But I think we've all seen with a bit of horror, right, what happens to, again, the legitimate president of Venezuela, recognized by many, many countries, Guaido, when he entered Colombia, and how he was received by the new government of Colombia. In essence, he was told that he was not welcome, that he had entered, by the way, in an illegitimate fashion. Well, duh, because publicly and officially, the dictatorship in Venezuela had said that he could not travel. So I guess he was supposed to still go and get get authorization from the Maduro dictatorship to go to his neighboring country, Colombia. And so, speaking of Colombia, you all know that Colombia is among the most important allies of the United States in the entire planet. It's a non-NATO partner. The United States over the years, and what I believe is one of the most successful foreign policy initiatives in my lifetime, in Colombia, has, you all, taxpayers, spent about $13 billion helping that country first. It was on the verge of becoming a failed state, and then after that, making sure that that their institutions are strengthened, that they adhere to the rule of law, and they have been incredible allies in the fight against narco-terrorism, against cartels, against terrorism, et cetera. And now we see a backsliding in a country that is hugely, hugely important for our national security interests. And I will tell you, let me give you a little tidbit. This is just between you and me. Nobody else has heard about this. I chair the subcommittee that decides, in the House, decides the funding that goes to everything having to do with foreign policy. And that includes obviously humanitarian assistance, that includes USAID, that includes Department of State, but it also includes funding that goes to, allies like Jordan and Israel and Egypt, but also Colombia. And I have been one of those who have fought really, really hard and have actually helped create the Colombia caucus in the House. And we've worked to make sure that Colombia is never forgotten because it has been such an important player. Imagine the dilemma that has created for me now. Do we continue to go to the American people? This ain't my money. Go to the American people and say, this is so important that we're going to take a chunk of your money and send it to our allies. Send it to Colombia. At the time when we see cocoa production escalating, at the time that we're seeing some really ugly things about how President Petro, and by the way, he was elected democratically, there's no doubt about that, but how President Petro now is kind of going through and weeding out people he does not like in the military and people who don't agree with him in the national police, et cetera. We see what he has done now with his embracing Maduro and Castro and Ortega. And so I have some very interesting decisions to make. I don't usually talk, I never talk about what is said in private meetings, but this was a meeting with a number of people. It was the Colombia caucus. We recently met with President Petro, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind because this was not a secret meeting by any stretch of the imagination. Congressman Cuellar, Democrat from Texas, who is the co-chairman of the Colombia caucus with me, and he's also an appropriator, in a very nice conversation said, Mr. Petro, this relationship is so important. Just in the last 2 years, he had the numbers. It's about $1 billion of taxpayer money that has gone to Colombia. And President Petro, who was leaning back in his chair, kind of looking up, said, I don't even see that. Totally dismissive of the aid and the assistance and the relationship with the United States. So needless to say, we have some important decisions to make there. Do I just tie that funding to a lot of strings? There have always been strings attached to that funding to our ally, Colombia. Or do I eliminate it until we are able to have further conversations with this president to figure out if in fact he's going to continue going down the same pathway, or if he's going to look at this relationship, about their role in this hemisphere, about the nature and the dangers of narco-terrorists, of cartel groups, et cetera, in our region. And so those are decisions that I'm in the process of making literally right now as we speak here today. So we have serious challenges in this hemisphere. And those challenges are not only challenges as far as, yes, immigration, but they are national security and economic challenges to the United States. But I am absolutely, frankly, optimistic if the United States adopts a consistent policy of, again, standing up against tyranny, helping those who are struggling and fighting and working for their freedom. And that means in a lot of different ways, standing up for the OAS Charter, because, it's the only international institution that has representative democracy as the only legitimate form of government. Standing up for those principles, if we do so, and we make sure that we're serious about it, and then I think that the future of this hemisphere and the security situation in this hemisphere, including the United States, is going to be bright. But if we continue to pretend that state sponsors of terrorism are okay, and that we should appease them, and we should tolerate them, and we should even help those who are doing business with those, and then there should be no surprise as to the future that confronts the people in this hemisphere, and therefore the national security interests of the United States. But I'm optimistic. I am super, super optimistic, even though I'm not happy with the policies that we're seeing right now coming from the administration. But we're going to continue to try to work with this administration, and where we can agree and where we disagree, try to pressure the administration to make sure that freedom, human rights, the national security interests of the United States in this hemisphere are not perceived to be less important than any other part of the world. The difference is that this one also affects us with immigration. This one affects us, I think, in a lot more of a direct fashion, but I'm optimistic. So thank FIU for once again putting this together. I don't know if anybody, well, I know that some people from Southcom are here. And by the way, what a privilege and a blessing. And obviously it's a no-brainer, but you know, in DC, those things don't happen. But what a privilege and an honor to have Southern Command here in our community. What a difference that has made, led now by General Richardson, who I think, by the way, is exceedingly clear on a lot of these issues. So thank you all very much. It's a privilege to be with you. I apologize for my voice. I'm getting over a cold, and this is about as strong as it gets. So thank you so much. Appreciate you all.